Okay, looks like we're at the top of the hour. So let me go ahead and say hello to everyone and welcome. My name is Sarah Macias. I'm glad that you have decided to join us for our Eco Community Life webinar with the Green Seminary Initiative. Serving with me as co-director of the Green Seminary Initiative and co-facilitator of today's webinar is Abby Mohawk. Abby is a PhD student at Drew Theological School and an ordained Presbyterian minister. What we're going to talk about today is recognizing first that to develop and sustain a culture of respect and of creation in our seminaries involves a comprehensive approach in all that we do on our campuses. Of course, one thing that we all do is eat. But what are the decisions that we should consider in such a basic practice as eating? Also, what are the ways in which we might communicate regularly about the environmental commitments and sustainable behaviors in order to develop a community-wide ecological ethos? We're looking forward to a rich conversation with our panelists on these topics. Today's webinar, you may know, is the fourth in a series of 5 webinars organized around the 5 focus areas of Green Seminary Initiative. These focus areas also present the framework for a set of standards which guide our new seminary environmental certification program, and we'll say a little bit about that at the end of our hour. If you missed either of the first 3 webinars in this series, you can find a link to a recording on our Facebook page or on our website. But before we get started, there are just a few housekeeping items. As you get a chance to see our mission statement there on the screen, please be sure that your lines are on mute unless you are speaking. Like others in this series, this webinar is being recorded so that we can share it with others later, and the muting will help us get a good sound quality. For the first half of our hour together, Abby is going to be guiding the conversation with our panelists, and there will be a time for us to field your questions in the second half. Just select the questions and answer box, or it might be a chat prompt at the bottom of your screen, and you can text your questions about what any of the panelists talk about on the following topic areas. Today, under the topic of community life, we're going to talk about food services. Are there ways in which we might manage our food services so that it provides food sourced and prepared in an environmentally healthy and humane manner? And more broadly, we will discuss ways to encourage and communicate a community ethos that informs community members and stakeholders about your commitment to creation, as well as the practices that you have already put in place to meet that commitment. So, without further ado, I want to introduce you to our panel. Along with Abby and myself, we have Matthew Riley. Matt earned his doctoral degree from Drew University. He currently serves as lecturer in Christianity and Ecology at Yale Divinity School and Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, where he teaches courses such as Christianity and Ecology and Environmental Ethics. And then there is Christopher Fici. Chris is a PhD candidate in theology and religion with a focus on eco-theology and comparative theology at Union Theological Seminary in New York City. The focus of his studies and research are on communities that are anticipating and creating ecologically sound and socially just personal, communal, and religious frameworks in the transition away from a fossil fuel-based society. Also, we have Rachel Matthews. Rachel is an MDiv candidate in her second year at Columbia Theological Seminary in Decatur, Georgia, and Rachel also serves as a pastoral intern at Druid Hills Presbyterian Church. And finally, Nathan Stuckey. Nate is the project director of the Seminary. The Seminary, if you haven't already heard of it, is a small-scale, sustainable agriculture model at Princeton Theological Seminary. Nate's scholarship explores the integration of theological education and agrarianism, which is so important as we consider ecology, sustainability, and food justice. So with that as our introduction, Abby, let's get started.
Hello. I need to just switch us to a different screen. So one moment, please. So we're going to spend 5 or 6 minutes talking about a lot of the the topics that Sarah talked about. And so I'm going to start with Matt. And Matt, if you could just talk to me about what you have seen either in your institution or others of good examples where attention is being made to food and community living around eating together. Matt, if you'll go first.
Absolutely, and thank you, Abby, and thank you, Sarah, for inviting us to this webinar. Thrilled to be here and to tell you a little bit about what's going on at Yale Divinity School in terms of our food. And one of our biggest steps in recent years has been the restructuring of our refectory, so the place where our students have their regular meals. We restructured not only the menu, but also the facilities. And part of this comes from the notion that, statistically speaking, those in the ministry and training to become ministers, they often struggle to find room to make their own wellness and health a priority. So we've focused on giving them more options for health in their experience here at Yale Divinity School. So we give them more fresh foods, more vegetarian options. There's a verdant salad bar. There's organic options. And we use materials in restructuring our refectory that promote sustainability and cut down on pollution and energy waste. And with our restructuring of our food here at Yale Divinity School, or YDS, the students have been key players in making this possible. So we have students like Julia Johnson, who's one of our current students, and she's been working with the Humane Society as well as folks in our food service programs here to try to bring more vegetarian and vegan options into our school, as well as some other projects like Meatless Mondays. And it's a long path towards success in this sort of work. But there's other ways students are also finding ways to make our food healthier, more ecological, and more humane. So we have a garden at Yale Divinity School, and every year between 20 and 30 students, staff, and faculty have plots where they're growing food. And it's an organic garden. We do our own composting, and the foods that we create, that we grow from those gardens, go towards feeding the families of those who are growing there. But they're also used in Eucharist services or in meals at the Berkeley Center here at Yale Divinity School. So we see it as a meeting not only of sustainable practices, but also a meeting of spirituality and faith practices as well. And it's a beautiful place. There's a hawk that lives there that helps keep the rodent population down. You can see students working there on a sunny day or sharing meals together under the trees there. It's really brought together the community, both in terms of ecological work and also the building of their faith. And right next to that, we have an urban meadow that we've planted, which is part of a larger project on Yale's campus. So there's vast fields of wildflowers growing all around our garden, and it's just beautiful. It's full of vibrant colors. There's bees, there's butterflies. We're just trying to transform not only how we do food, but also how we use our grounds. And there's a number of other projects as well going on here. We have a sustainable food project that our larger university is a part of, and we have 2 farms associated with that are part of our Yale community. And upwards of 40% of the food served to students on Yale's campus, which is about 15,000 meals a day. Upwards of 40% of that food comes from local, organic, sustainably grown food. So we've put a lot of effort into this in a lot of different ways, and we're excited to continue to grow more.
Can you spend a little bit of time sharing some successful strategies that you've seen or that you can recommend in fostering that community ethos and how you communicate that with both people in Yale and outside?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things to consider is that change comes slowly when you're trying to make effective change in an institution like a seminary or a divinity school. And in many ways that begins by raising awareness, which is often started by the students and the faculty. But an important part of our success has been getting the administration on board and also staff, which means working with food services, working with our hospitality crew here at Yale. And it's a team effort because there are people who come to work day in, day out who provide our food for us. And if they're not fully committed, then we're just creating extra work for them. So we need to find ways to bring them on board as well. So part of this is built into this ecological idea that if all parts of an ecosystem are thriving together, then the entire system thrives. And I think we approach it the same way here at Yale, where we bring all members of our community together to work on this. And this is in the recognition that our future it's a shared future. And the only way we're going to get to that shared future is if we journey there together. A shared future means that's a shared task, and we try to organize it that way.
That's great.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to share with us about community ethos and food? You have just about like 1 more minute of your.
Oh, just 1 more minute.
No, we'll have time at the end, I promise. But
yeah. One of our biggest developments recently has been we've started work on a living building residential complex, which will be one of the first building at Yale and the first seminary or divinity school that has a living building certification. And the idea is to build this eco-community where students live and practice sustainability and stewardship 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and build that into their faith life. We also have a joint degree in religion and ecology, where students can take courses in environmental science as well as eco-theology and environmental ethics. And just a few weeks ago, we announced the new MAR certificate. So that's a Master of Arts in Religion and Ecology. And it's supported by contingent faculty like myself, core faculty, as well as the work of folks like Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm, who are the co-founders and co-directors of the Forum on Religion and Ecology. And we've put together a robust set of courses that are both online and brick and mortar courses, spanning the entire sort of spread of the world's religions and ecologies. And we in building our sort of intellectual and spiritual community here at Yale, we also work to reach beyond communities. We're also building massive open online courses to make teaching in religion and ecology available to people no matter where they are, no matter what their income level is. And so we've launched a series of massive open online courses in September. And we've already had 14,000 people sign up for those courses from over 120 different countries. So we found there's a well of interest in religion and the environment. People are looking for answers both spiritually and practically with their ecological problems. And we're just trying to build that community here at Yale and also elsewhere.
That's great. Thank you, Matthew. I bet there will be some questions at the end about how that massive online class structure works. So I hope you'll tell us more at the end of our time together. I want to move us to Chris. Chris, can you at Union to talk a little bit about how food and the community works at Union?
Sure. I think one of the ways that we've been successful at this has been in the classroom in some ways. We have a couple of different scholars. Brigitte Kahl, who is a scholar of the New Testament, Chung Hyun Kyung, who's an eco-feminist scholar from Korea, who both been teaching at Union for some time now, over about 15, 20 years. And we've been able to take courses with them on kind of biblical theologies of food, courses on ecofeminism, which have a very specific food component to them, and which always feature just the fact of us eating together. And I think there is, in the time I've been here, always within the kind of community itself, people who are living here, this, I don't know if you want to call it like kind of an underground food culture, but there's a lot of people here who are really, really concerned, increasingly so as new students come in, new classes come in every year, with understanding the connection between how they eat, what they eat, and just the very, I guess you could say, substance of theology itself, the idea that food is sacred. And that manifests as well in kind of this increasing consciousness around the food services we have in our community. We work with caterers who are coming from the local city area, either from the Upper West Side or from the Harlem area, who've been very receptive in providing a lot of conscious, considerate food sources, people who are coming from different dietary preferences, people who are gluten-free or vegan, we're very conscious about providing those kinds of options. And also kind of integrating with some local CSAs in the neighborhood too. Corbin Hill Food Project is one really well-known CSA in the Harlem area that has been, I've worked with them, and they've had food service, basically have had pickups right next door to us at Riverside Church. So we've been conscious about trying to include students in that because it also provides a very affordable option. And in our worship services as well, we've had a number of different services in our chapels evolved around kind of the sacred elements of food. We've worked with the Sisters of the Community of the Holy Spirit who are up in Brewster, New York. They have a farm called Bluestone Farm. And one of the sisters, Catherine Grace, created the Celebration of Life Eucharist. Spent some time at this farm, and they've actually, they use, for example, like the buttermilk or the blueberries from the farm itself for the Eucharist. So we brought that Eucharist to Union, kind of thinking about, our everyday food as being something sacred. And we have a project which is a little bit in a dormant state at the moment called the Edible Churchyard, which has kind of been a project in which we've used some campus space to grow food and to encourage this idea that the food that we eat and how we eat, it's a theological act. It's very important to think about this as sacred substance and how does that interact in the space of our own bodies and in the world around us.
That's great. Thank you. What recommendations do you have for schools as they make healthy and humane food a priority, and what challenges have you encountered?
I think, to kind of echo something that Matt said, it goes slowly, requires a lot of patience. One of the things that we've struggled with here, particularly in Union, is to kind of bring food consciousness, and I think ecological consciousness, more to the center of the community's concern. Union historically has been a seminary focused on the intersections of faith and justice work. And in terms of kind of issues of eco-theology and environmental justice, they're in some ways still kind of on the periphery of the community's concern. Even our edible churchyard garden is kind of way up on the roof of one of our residence halls, and it's like an intentional space that you have to go to. So I think there's kind of a fundamental challenge in terms of thinking about food justice, food consciousness, eco-consciousness, and having being one of the central facets of the school's mission, and being very intentional about that. And that will manifest, like we've struggled to kind of do things like composting or to kind of we have a very old seminary building, and it's bringing that up to kind of a green code, as it were, whether that's a LEED certification or something like that. And just, and speaking for myself as a student and knowing my fellow classmates, just the daily act of struggling to eat well. As Michael Pollan says, kind of in the preface to Omnivore's Dilemma, food causes us so much anxiety. And I think that overcoming that anxiety in terms of like eating well, and not just eating well, but thinking about it as a sacred act, really is, we have to bring that more centrally into our everyday consciousness, but also into the consciousness of the institution. And it's hard work, and it goes slowly, and there's a lot of other things which, if they may either get in the way or be competing for similar concerns. So it's in the community space, I think I've noticed, and we've noticed, that it takes a lot of hard, patient work to do it.
Can you say a little bit more about community ethos? You started talking about that, and maybe you can talk about divestment as well in that conversation.
I would say, like, one example of what we've done well as a community in commitment to food and to earth honoring consciousness has been, we were one of the first seminaries, if not the first, to actually make a commitment to divest from our fossil fuel based investments. That actually happened a few years ago, and it wasn't this. I always think of folks like Tim DeChristopher who had to do other things, he was, spending time in jail for some of his activism, but also some of the work he's done up at Harvard did, in which it was a struggle to get the administration to even consider these concerns of divestment. And I think that's the case still. Here at Union, our administration was actually fully with us. We were actually advocating for divestment amongst the student body at the same time that the board of trustees was actually thinking about doing it. We all kind of just one day discovered we were thinking about the same thing. So that's a unique part of Union's kind of community ethos around justice issues and committing to something like this. But again, I think that I think Union is hopefully moving more in the perspective of becoming much more kind of centered in this ecological consciousness. Larry Rasmussen, who some of us know was a professor there at Union for some time, and he talks about kind of earth honoring faith and making your ecological communities these kinds of anticipatory communities, like leading the way forward. And a lot of us still wish that Larry was teaching here actively. He'll actually be back here in the fall. So, but he was someone when he was teaching here was very active in kind of pushing Union in that direction. So we're trying to some of us trying to follow in his footsteps to do that. So I think it will naturally happen. And there's a lot of students every year who are coming in with a concern.
That's great. Thank you, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
Rachel, can you talk to us a little bit about good examples from Columbia about where attention is being made to source and food preparation and how you see Columbia's food system? Are you there, Rachel?
Okay, thank you. I want to say again that I am a MDiv student, and I'm saying that to mean that I'm only here for a short time. So everything that I'm talking about is work that has been done before me, or started before I got here, and has been carried on by the staff and faculty, and will be carried on after I leave. So I'm voicing the good work of the people here at Columbia. So at Columbia, we have a nonprofit called Healthy Seminarians, Healthy Church that's housed on campus. And they do a lot of the research work that Matthew was kind of talking about, how clergy members are some of the most unhealthy people in society, and really trying to help us hone in on that and to become more whole people spiritually, physically, and with our eating habits as well. And last year we had a food evaluation group of faculty, staff, and students, and also staff from the kitchen. Our kitchen staff in the refectory is contracted workers, which is another obstacle because they have their own limitations. But we are inspired by the food covenant at Drew Theological Seminary, and so we came together and discussed what food should mean to and what our cafeteria should mean as a focal point on campus. And as a result, are working with the Office of Student Life to draft a food covenant for Columbia Seminary. And more tangibly, we have started serving more vegetarian dishes in the cafeteria, which is to pay attention to our bodies, but also to the environment. And but we still have a lot of work to do, as they have both voiced in the slowness of it, but also in just paying attention to the most multifaceted nature of food work, in that eating healthily and consciously doesn't look the same for every person, because we're all healthy and allergic to different things and have our own restrictions, and justice looks different for different people too. And so we are trying to have hospitality around that and an open discussion, in that all perspectives are welcome for what food should mean to Columbia's campus and in our cafeteria. Yeah.
That's great. So you talked a little bit about challenges or obstacles. Can you maybe say a little bit more about that, but also can you talk about some opportunities that have come up on your campus? And this might be a good time for you to talk about the napkins.
Yes. Yes. So through the discussion we had, we learned that the table and the cafeteria and food is something that's obviously theological, but as such should be a continuation of what happens in the classroom. And so really having a conversation about practical theology and what does it mean to practice what we preach, coming together at the table. So a recommendation, I guess from the food discussions we had, would be really making it an extension of the classroom and in an open discussion where, because we were surprised how many people had opinions about the food that maybe shouldn't have been, the food that was served in the cafeteria. But also, let's see, so strategies, some things that we're doing concretely. We have the napkin project in our cafeteria, which was a grassroots project that started with some students who wanted to stop using so many paper things in our cafeteria. So we have cloth napkins available, and there's a basket that you can clip your name to it, and when it's still usable, you put it in the usable bucket or basket, but when it needs washing, you put it in the washable basket, and people just take turns washing them whenever it's full. So that really requires no maintenance and has a lot of buy-in from students here. But just to give a shout out to our garden project, because that seems I want to get Columbia's garden project in there as well. We this year have begun construction on a rainwater capture system off one of our buildings, and so our garden will be using only rainwater, and we are also partnering with a local nonprofit, Global Growers, that finds urban space for refugees to farm. And so soon half of our garden space will be used by refugee families, and so it will be an opportunity for our students and faculty and staff to think about the intersection of justice for the marginalized and food justice.
That's great. What a great intersection between food justice and refugee justice. Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to move us now to talk with Nate. And Nate, here at the Seminary, a lot of your work is around food, and so I wonder if you'll just tell us about some good examples from the Seminary around food sourcing and preparation, and you can add to that how you see fit.
Sure. I'll begin also by thanking everyone for their participation, and to Green Seminaries for putting this together. It's great to hear from everyone else. I'm scribbling notes feverishly here as I listen to others. So as far as food, humanely sourced, sustainably sourced for the Princeton Seminary community, I would echo some of the things that have already been said insofar as change is slow, especially in big old institutions, in buildings and facilities that were constructed decades or more ago, and all these things. And so we are just very barely scratching the surface of this, insofar as the food that we're growing at the farm is trickling onto the main campus. So I'm going to share an example of a different school because it's a way better. They're ahead of us on this. And so it's the Lawrenceville School is a prep school that's a few miles down the road from us here. It is like sort of ridiculously elite. However, they have done something extremely creative in their food sourcing and cafeteria. The story, as I understand it, and I can't cite my sources in a webinar, so you'll have to go research it yourself if you really want to know. But At one point, they had either Aramark or Marriott as their food service provider, and so a chef was employed by that food service provider. And at some point, this chef told the school, you need to end your contract with Aramark, say, and you need to hire me, and we'll do this better. And the campus had some property, and they decided some of this property they were actually leasing to a local farmer, conventional farmer. They decided to start farming some of that. They hired a farmer. They began growing their own food, and then that farmer worked with the new chef who started his own new little organization or business called Sustainable Fare. And now the chef tells the farmer what to grow at the farm on the school's property, with the agreement that his new food service company will purchase everything that's grown at the farm. And so that what they serve in their cafeteria, they can't grow everything by any means, but they're growing. A couple of years ago, I think the food service bought $10,000 worth of produce from the farm. So there's curious economic factors to all this, and so figuring out an economic model of how you can source this stuff and do it locally, and also incorporate students and their educational experiences working on the farm and whatnot, I think is pretty inspiring. And I would also just tip my hat to the folks at the Methodist Theological School in Ohio at the Seminary Hill Farm. I forget the farmer's name right now, but he's doing a fantastic job of producing food there and getting it into their cafeteria. So those are two examples.
Ted Peterson, I think.
Thank you. Two kind of good examples, and we look at some of those examples and are aspiring to that, but have a long way to go.
Great. So can you tell us some of the challenges that you're facing as you're building up the program at the Seminary?
Sure. I mean, there's the whole industrial food complex. That would be one. It's another huge. I mean, if the goal, and this, we still have to figure this out, but let's just hypothetically say the goal is that at the farm, and we have 21 acres there, which is an unbelievable resource, but if the goal was to grow as much food as possible for Princeton Theological Seminary, then there would be a number of challenges between here and there, not least of which is labor. So who's doing the labor at the farm, and who's paying that labor, and are they being, fairly compensated? And then there's the logistical stuff of how do we keep, right now we have a contract with Aramark, do we keep that or not? Or do we try to steal the guy from the Lawrenceville school? So there would be a lot to figure out there. At the same time, the possibilities here, I think, are absolutely extraordinary. And even with Aramark, we recently lost our head chef at Aramark because they were given another opportunity, and so we have a new chef. But we're in transition there. But the chef that we most recently had was all in on this conversation. And like, she described to me her vision for what our dining space could look like if she just sort of had free reign. But she too is held under some of the systems and structures of the industrial complex, but was very open to the conversation about what it would look like for us to grow stuff that she would purchase and then that she would put into the cafeteria. So there's cracks in the system, I think, wherever we are. And so, as far as the hopeful silver lining here, and I think it's a line that runs through all of the things that we're hearing. You have to pay attention to the resources that you have in your context and figure out a way to leverage those for the sake of vitality and sustainability. I'll stop there. What next?
So can you talk a little bit about how you've been translating the experience at the Seminary to the larger community? What successful strategies have you seen or do you recommend? Let's start there.
Yeah, sure. So part of what's unique about the Seminary is that its mission is theological education. The Seminary exists because we think we can train leaders for the church and the world in that space, in that context, in a way that isn't opposed to what we do on the main campus, but it's a way that brings it to life, makes it three-dimensional. So we're developing curriculum and programs that happen at the farm, and then finding ways to get other faculty involved in that. So just the fact of having students at the farm engaged in this work and figuring out a way to sort of wed some pretty traditional theological education content with the practices of sustainable or regenerative agriculture has been just extraordinarily exciting and humbling to watch the way that space changes the relationships that students have with each other. It changes their relationship with the land, and I think it changes their relationship with God. And then one of the things that we have done here that has been helpful in getting more faculty involved is just last fall, our faculty approved a certificate in theology, ecology, and faith formation that our master's students can earn throughout the course of their degree by taking 12 credits from an approved list of courses, plus a 1-credit practicum. And so the way we populated that list of courses for the practicum was we went through the existing course catalog and looked for professors who were teaching courses that are already reached out in an ecological direction. And then we met with them and said, hey, would you let us list this as part of the certificate? Most all of them were very receptive to that. And so now they have the opportunity to sort of bend those courses in a ecological direction. And then that has the effect of just expanding the whole conversation around ecology and sustainability. So that's a couple of things.
That's great. Okay. Is there you have about 30 seconds more. Is there anything else you want to say, Nate, about the Seminary?
Well, I'll just name sort of 3 things that are extremely important as we're working this out, and we're very early in this journey. But shared meals, shared labor, and shared stories have been really critical to try to sort of uncovering the sort of multidimensional reality of the ecological conversation. And one of the ways that has been very, I think, revealing for me, I got into this because of my love of agriculture and trying to understand the agricultural and food story of our country and our world, and immediately saw how that conversation those stories lead and intersect very much with all the other stories, and particularly stories around racial justice and immigration, all these things. And so just to say that, like, once you crack open the ecological nut, it goes everywhere. And when you give people the opportunity to share meals and stories and labors, you can get to that, and I think in a meaningful way.
That's great. Thank you. So this question is for all 4 of you, and it's more an invitation for you to talk with each other. So do any of you panelists have a question for someone else on the panel, or to follow up on something that one of you has said?
And while they're thinking about that, there now is a good opportunity. If any of our viewers have any questions or comments, just go to that. It's a chat prompt or a question and answer prompt at the bottom of your screen, and we'll field those questions for you. But yeah,
I have a question for Chris, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm in love with this idea of an edible churchyard and the sacramental aspects of eating. What is an edible churchyard, and how do we make it?
And the original idea for the project was to use. I mean, it's kind of the basic idea is like you have space, and I think the good examples of this are the Seminary project, what they're doing at the Methodist Theological School as well. Like, even wherever you are, and we're basically on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, but we have space to grow food. Even at that, we have a small quad in the middle of our seminary, or we have a small space on top of one of our residence halls, but there we can grow food. And it's a small space. It's not necessarily enough to feed the community or ever that's the intention of it. But it's really to look at, fundamentally to look at the space in your community as sacred ground where you can grow food. And to be able to engage in that practice together. I think there's something I've experienced and other folks have experienced where in seminary life, it's so much about the head and so much about this kind of intellectual endeavor. We're just coming up to the garden, putting your hands in the dirt and planting seeds is something that's really fundamentally human and fundamentally divine altogether. And it's the Edible Church, I was trying to create a space where people, I think as you mentioned earlier that, people who are going into ministry, whether they're Christians or coming from other faith traditions, whatever work they're doing, that they have some kind of earth honoring component to that. It's not something that it's not a periphery thing. It's a fundamental thing for our religious life in the world today. To have these skills, to be able to understand how to plant something, how to compost, but also how to be versed in eco-theology. So that's basically the Edible Church. I was trying to provide a space to give people who come through our seminary the skills to do that, to carry with them.
It's awesome.
But it's hard, and I think we look up to the Seminary, we look up to other projects. We don't feel like we're doing it very well. It's very slow and hard and it's patient work, and it's frustrating to kind of get people to buy in. But it's an idea that it's not going to be abandoned. It's hard work to just bring it to fruition.
Yeah. Well, come on down Route 1 and we'll show you slow progress.
Okay, I'm happy to. Yeah, I would love to.
I have a question for Matt there at Yale. You mentioned restructuring your refectory and including the menu and the facility. So assuming, well, I'm curious, do you have still a major food service provider like Aramark or Marriott, or were you able to go another direction? And if so, what did that look like?
I can't provide many of the details on this. This happened before I came here to Yale in my current, status as a lecturer. So I'm not really sure if I'm qualified to answer that. I don't know the ins and outs of it. Although Yale does have its own hospitality service where we are creating, packaging, distributing all of our own food in the same sense that a company like Aramark would be externally. So I know that we are doing a lot of it in-house, and I'm not sure how much of that is in-house and if there's any external contracts as well. I'm just not knowledgeable on that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
I have a question for any of the five of you. As a student, I see from my perspective, a kind of struggle on campus between needing institutional buy-in versus student buy-in. And I wonder how any of you navigate those waters, trying to move things forward.
A great question.
I do have one short answer. The kind of work you're doing with the napkins, that's the seeds that are planted that become big institutional change. And I speak about the Yale Divinity School refectory. When I was a student there some 10, 12 years ago, we had an old refectory, didn't have many vegetarian options. We used disposable plates. It was an ecological mess, right? But students like yourself, like myself at that time, we just started doing things like bringing in our own plates. We installed a dishwasher. We didn't do the napkin thing, but we did things like that. And pretty soon the administration caught on and said, oh, the students want this. It's happening. We can either stop it and look like the bad guys, or we can support this change, which is, it meshes with our mission. It's what Yale Divinity School believes in anyway. Let's practice what we preach. And, it took a decade to get from students like myself bringing in my own plate and putting in a dishwasher all the way up to this big building project where we restructure our entire dining service. So you're planting the seeds. That's the first step.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, you always want the administration to be following what the students are really, what their fundamental concern is. So, echo everything Matthew said. It's just like those little things that the students begin to do can make a big impact. And I know that's a common kind of conflict in terms of thinking about our everyday ecological consciousness. Sometimes it seems that the small stuff is not enough. And sometimes it isn't, but it's really like that metaphor of planting those seeds and doing things, and really having the student community lead those things. I mean, that was one of the questions I kind of, I was going to have for you, Rachel, and also I think for all of us too, because you mentioned you're only there for a short time, and for academic life, whether you're a student or a teacher, is increasingly a transitory thing. So how do you build those kinds of seeds that turn into sustainable practices for the community? And I think that's one of the things we've struggled with at the Edible Churchyard, is passing it along to the next wave of folks. But that really has to come from the students, I think, first and foremost.
Yeah, and just from the experience of why the Farminary exists in the first place, it very much was it was a whole chorus of ideas from different corners of the institution, but a lot of it, the vast majority of it, being student driven, whether it was people who were saying we can do a better job of how we do food in the cafeteria, or what about our carbon footprint, or what about, laundry facilities, or, who knows what, this is all, it all sort of converged. And then all of a sudden there was the Farminary idea that became a way for the administration to recognize they were listening to all these things and a way of responding to it. But it just wouldn't have happened. Well, it wouldn't have happened apart from the broader sort of national and global conversation. Like, it's just in the air so much more than it was 10 or 15 years ago. But B, because there were so many different concerns coming from students. And fortunately, we're at a season at Princeton Seminary where the administration had their ear to the ground and they were paying attention. So that was a beautiful moment where, the students and admin could come together and this thing happened. So you're making it happen. I mean, I know it's hard to see at ground level, but yeah, I think we're all like, go. So.
Thank you. Yeah.
So we have enough time for each of you to offer just kind of 1 or 2 minutes of closing thoughts before we close our time together. So I wonder if we could go backwards. Nate, do you want to go first to share some closing thoughts?
Wow, I really enjoyed that first time where I could think for a while. Yeah, I can try to go first. I think the part of this whole conversation that is exciting to me, just picking up sort of where I just left off, is here we are, right? With a number of different institutions at different places in the country, with reference to other institutions in other places of the country, and the conversation is growing. And I tell people all the time, the conversation at the intersection of faith and ecology is literally exploding. And the fact, Matt, that you get to do what you do at Yale, I mean, it wouldn't have been that long ago before that would have been sort of difficult to imagine. And the work that you're focusing on there, Chris. So I guess all of it is just exciting to me. And I think my passion in all of this, or one of my passions in all of this, is to keep paying attention to the life of God in the midst of this. And I guess I have a deep hope that it's not just people messing around with the ground, but that God's up to something. The Spirit of God is at work in all of the corners of the world, and heaven knows, theological education is a space that could use a fresh breath of the Spirit. And I think this is one way that it's happening. And it's extremely rewarding to participate in an ecological kind of conversation where we recognize kind of our interdependence and the possibility of new ideas and new momentum that can be gained as we collaborate and cross-pollinate and all the ecological metaphors.
Thank you. Rachel, do you have any closing thoughts that you want to share?
I am just, as a student who is very much has my ear to the ground in my own personal discernment, and as a member of this community with what's going on in the larger community, I'm just really grateful to hear about all the work that you're all doing. And I second and am grateful for Green Seminary Initiative in that I would love more partnership between the different seminaries, and so I'm grateful for the work that Green Seminary Initiative is doing.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah.
Chris, what kinds of closing thoughts do you have from Union?
I'll want to echo what Nate was saying about this being a very hopeful conversation. I know that looking at kind of the larger situation that we're in as members of this planetary community, we need to have as much hope as possible, to think about it in kind of Christian terms like resurrection, or Hindu terms like reincarnation. As a moment, and like the work that we're doing in our own spaces and doing together are ways in which we're anticipating the way forward. And I just love the way that Larry Rasmussen, again, who in his book Earth Honoring Faith, talks about these kind of anticipatory communities, which is what we're all trying to form. He says that they're kinds of like home places to reimagine the world, to reorder possibilities, to really make things happen by conscious moral choice, and to really develop virtues which are profoundly ecological. But also, I love this line, he says, here the fault lines of modernity are exposed as well. So I think we have to really look at our work and be humble about it in the small ways that it is, but also know that it's a very, as I think as Nate said, to be part of what God is asking us to do right now, requiring of us. It's an opportunity. Climate change and climate crisis is really scary, but it's also, I think, a big opportunity for us to create the kind of world that we want to live in. So that's what we're trying to do. I think, we're not, speaking for myself, the Edible Church, it's certainly not happening as fast as one would like, but we have to be committed to this and be doing it together too. And I'm really glad for the Green Seminary Initiative and for Green Faith for being, kind of our support for this.
Thanks, Chris. Matt, do you want to say some closing words?
Yeah, I also want to end with a message of hope and also a few words about strategic communication and strategic action. The enormity of the climate crisis and the global nature of it, it can be really overwhelming, right? Even those of us that are working on this day in and day out, we can become burnt out with compassion fatigue. We can become frustrated with the slowness of change, and the reality that we're already living in a planet where the climate has changed. This can seem daunting, right? And raising awareness is a problem too. And not just in terms of ecological problems, but also raising awareness of this being a spiritual problem, one that affects our very theology, our salvation, our relationship to God. And I'm going to quote a few quotes from Anthony Lazarowitz, who is the director of the Yale program on climate change communication. I mentioned hope, but let's look at the despair first. So their research shows that four out of 10 humans on the planet have never even heard of the concept of climate change. 4 out of 10. And you go to countries like Bangladesh or places like Bangladesh or Egypt, where the effects of climate change will be felt most acutely, the number rises to somewhere around 6 out of 10 people have never heard of the concept of climate change, right? But there is grounds for hope here, because if you take those same people and you explain to them what climate change is and ask them if they want effective and immediate policy and political change on these issues, 70% of them say, yes, actually, we already know about climate change. We're experiencing it here. We just didn't know it was a global phenomenon. We didn't know there was a scientific study going on about it, and we want change. So 70% of those people who've never even heard of climate change want change. And similar statistics go for the broader population globally as well. People care about the earth. They want change, right? And we need to meet people where they are, not where we are. And we need to think about that in terms of our outreach and our work, right? So most people don't want to be, or they can't be, tree-hugging, hemp-wearing, vegan hippies, right? I personally, I love that lifestyle. It's fantastic, but most people can't be there. They never could. They have other responsibilities. They can't live like that. And I think the same applies for seminarians and seminaries as well. They want to care about the environment, and they do care about the environment, but our communication and our outreach hasn't been as effective as it could be. And I think that part of that is meeting people where they are, not where we want them to be, right? People care about biodiversity. We care about our children. We care about our future. We care about healthy relationships between God, humans, and nature. And I think too that we can't think of theology or Christianity or other faith traditions as being like a tool or a hammer that we can use to pound on issues like climate change. We need to see them as sort of being mutually flourishing, right? And with this in mind, I think there's an ecological future for all of us. It's a shared future. It's a flourishing future for the earth, for humanity, and for us spiritually, and for our relationships with God. And our work that we're doing, and that all of you are doing here in this webinar, and the people watching it, our work is all part of that great work.
Thank you, Matt.
Wonderful.
So, Sarah, do you want to just close us?
Sure. Well, when Abby and I put these panelists together, we never know how they're going to turn out, but this has just been phenomenal. So thanks to everybody for participating, to Abby and to Matt and Chris and Rachel and Nate. This has been a great discussion, and we've got you've given us lots to think about. As I mentioned earlier, today's webinar is the 4th in a series of 5 webinars that we've been offering every 2 weeks. The topics are selected based on the 5 focus areas of the Green Seminary Initiative. And so the next one is on eco-public leadership. It will be held 2 weeks from today on Wednesday, March 8th, from 5 until 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we have 2 panelists for that grand finale. We will have Dean Gail O'Day from Wake Forest School of Divinity and Dean Javier Vieira from Drew Theological School. To learn more about that webinar, we've got a slide with some information with the website. If we can pull that up, Abby. You can go to our Facebook page or to our website and learn more about how to register for that webinar. Or you can always email us at greenseminaries@drew.edu, and we can get you that information. To those of you listening, if you think of questions later, again, just email us. We want to stay in touch and keep the conversation going. And finally, if you and your school are interested in learning more about our seminary environmental certification program, we had an orientation webinar already, but we recorded it for you. And it is available on our website and Facebook page, so check that out. We see it as a transformative opportunity to take a comprehensive approach with all these areas, adding an ecological lens to our education and liturgy, ritual and worship, and building and grounds and community life, like we discussed today, and public leadership that we'll talk about in a couple of weeks. The deadline for receiving applications to the certification program is April 22nd, Earth Day. So let's talk about that with any schools that are interested in learning more about that. Finally, at Green Seminary Initiative, we feel that there is obviously so much work ahead as we equip the religious leaders of today and tomorrow for the ecological challenges facing our world. So thanks again for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.